Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the WolfCast, the Malware Wolf podcast. Today is Saturday, June the 12th, 2021. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alan, aka Corgi Sec. I'm joined as always by my co-host Jason, aka Destruct Icon. How you doing,
Hello. Jason? I'm doing wonderful. Just fantastic. It's been 2 weeks since we've done this, and it feels like the world has ended, revived, and is back again. Yeah.
I mean, how do you know it hasn't?
Oh my God, my brain just exploded. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we do here. Some very, very high-level philosophical discussion, folks. We're the team at malwarewolf.com, and we're here to talk about all things cybersecurity. So, yeah, hopefully we got some good stuff for you today. Thank you, everybody who listened to our first podcast. I know, rough around the edges, but hey, it'll only get worse. I mean better.
It will only get worse. We didn't even say the title of the episode 2. What are you doing, man? What are we doing today?
To? Fine. I'll leave that to you since you came up with it. If you want to say the title.
Yes, I do. Okay, so before we jump into all of our goodies, episode 2 here, we're going to be talking about recruitment. This is going to be a series. Probably be a handful of these over the next, I would say next couple weeks, but I mean, we're not going to get to the next one for the next couple weeks. But we will be getting to a large series of detailed recruitment, explanations of what the fields look like, and our title. Our title, as I just absolutely adore it, is called The Land of Expectations. We're going to be focusing on expectations, like what you may have of getting into the field of security. We're going to be talking about the overall landscape of what type of jobs we're seeing and where they might be coming from. There may or may not be some bias in there, but from our perspective, you'll at least be able to hear what we've seen, what we've dealt with, for this episode. The future episodes, we're going to be detailing out a lot of good information about what have we seen as our failures, what have we seen as our successes, and what has everybody done to make themselves better.
Yep, and as part of that recruitment series, we'll get into other topics, things like getting started, skills building, resume writing, education certificates, job hunting, and then interviews. So, yeah, this should take a little while because we have a lot to say. However, one other thing, since this is only our second episode, but we already have our first guest. So joining us for this week's episode as well is a good friend of mine who is also located here in Tokyo. How you doing, John?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. All right. So we talked a little bit about the structure of our podcast before, basically. So, yeah, I guess now that we have a completely nonsensical intro out of the way, we should probably start getting into some of the main topics, right?
Right. We can make it worse. You want me to make it worse? I can go right back on there and just...
Yeah. Well, let's not. The two people we have listening, we probably don't want to scare them off quite yet.
Sure.
Let's wait till we have 3. Then we have some,
okay. We got some
room to shed some listeners. Exactly.
Okay.
All right. So as usual, as we mentioned, we're gonna go into the news. And as we mentioned before, this is not going to be a very in-depth discussion generally of the news and the different things. However, we do have a number of different things we at least want to kind of shout out to, at the very least give you a headline, and we're going to provide all the links to all of these stories into the episode description so you can go and check them out for yourself. A couple of these we're going to talk on a little bit more where we kind of feel it needs a little bit of a discussion, but generally the idea is to kind of keep this fairly short. So yeah, I guess let's get into that. So the first story is coming from Dark Reading, and it's about international law enforcement operation that disrupted the slip marketplace. Admittedly, I actually didn't know that much about the Slip marketplace before, but this essentially is just another essentially marketplace that is selling login credential, things like that. There's a ton of these, but it's always kind of good to see that these places are being taken down, and this was mostly dealing with things like usernames and passwords for bank accounts, online payments accounts, mobile phone accounts, etc. So good to see that.
I have
this
a
was
question.
Yeah.
So it's spelled SLILPP. That's the second time in the past 5 minutes my brain has it just completely exploded. So it's slip. Like I gave you the slip.
I don't know. I told you. I just saw it.
Oh.
That's how it reads to me. I also can't read or spell very well, so I could be entirely wrong. But I'm gonna say slip because that's a word I know how to pronounce.
Alan, you've been in Japan too long.
Yes, I have. English is hard. The next story, and this is kind of a follow-up on a story basically from earlier that I'm sure you guys have all heard about. It comes from Bleeping Computer, and it's in regards to the CD Projekt hack. CD Projekt data stolen in ransomware attack is now circulating online. So, not too much to say about this, but if you kind of follow the story at all, you know that's essentially CD Projekt, the makers of Cyberpunk 2077, where they were hacked, and a lot of their data was taken. And when they basically refused to kind of cooperate, I think, and paid a ransom, the hackers threatened to release the data online, and it seems like they've kind of come through with that. So yeah, that's out there now, and yeah, that's actually not the only one of these types of stories we're going to cover this week. So this is becoming a bit of a pattern.
Yeah, we only have like 4 things about ransomware in here. So.
Oh, we said ransomware. Our SEO is going to go through the roof.
Yep. We got to get a little Pee-wee button again. I forgot about that. Word of the day. Okay.
Yeah, that's probably how the CD Projekt people sounded when this happened.
Probably.
Too soon.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so following on from that is another story kind of in that vein from also Bleeping Computer, and this time the lucky winner is Electronic Arts. Hackers breach gaming giant Electronic Arts, steal game source code. Yeah, so like I said, this is kind of a trend. For those of you not familiar with EA, they're a pretty big publisher, and in this particular case, seems like this was quite bad. Source code to the Frostbite engine used to make things like Battlefield, FIFA, etc. was leaked, which is this is not great for them. So I'm sure they're not too happy.
I mean, they should just be migrating everything to the Unreal Engine 5 anyway, so who cares?
I mean, after this, they might be, considering the engine source code's out there. Yep. So yeah, that's fun. Next, a story from USA Today, and this is in regards to the JBS, the meat processing company, the largest one in the world, I believe. And the headline here is basically that meat company JBS confirms it paid $11 million ransom in cyber attack. So yeah, that's I think, based on what I've seen, one of the biggest ransom paid out. I don't know if you're
certainly huge. I can tell you one thing is for sure though, like 100%. They probably got the meat sweats when they had to pay that ransom.
I hate you so much. Also, mainly I hate you because I'm supposed to make terrible jokes. But it's okay.
We're not trying to make light of a poor situation, but comedy is the only way we can deal with our lives.
Oh, sad but true. So yeah, this seems to be the group that was attributed with this was the R Evil gang, basically. So they're, for those of you not familiar, they're a Russian-speaking gang. This, as I mentioned, this seems to be the largest ransomware demand on record, which, I feel like this only gonna keep going up. The last ransom amount that I heard about that I think was the biggest at the time was like at the 5 million, and that was the Colonial Pipeline one.
Yeah, I know some of the folks that we know that are consultants have dealt with like very large, high-paying things, and they tend to get brought down by a lot. Like requests of the tens of millions are not necessarily common, but it does happen. But it usually is a situation where they're like, oh, we can only pay you this much, and they go, okay, just give us the money. But
yeah. Well, I'm sure we're gonna keep having these types of stories.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one is actually pretty significant, and this comes from scmagazine.com, and it's in regards to the Supreme Court narrows the interpretation of the CFAA to the relief of ethical hackers. The CFAA, everybody should probably be familiar, is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And this is a pretty kind of wide-reaching act used for a lot of, to go after, even things like ethical hackers, just because the interpretation was so wide. And I think this is kind of a fairly important, fairly important story and a fairly important decision. And essentially what has happened here is the scope of the CFAA has been narrowed to be a little bit more essentially black and white in terms of the interpretation, a lot less gray area. So because basically what it is now is either you have access, you're authorized to have access to data or a computer, or you don't. Before that, it was a lot of room for interpretation, which was misused, unfortunately, to go against security researchers and people doing ethical hacking. I think this is actually a pretty significant change. So I'm kind of curious what the overall the security community take is going to be on this. I'm assuming for most people they're going to see this as a good thing.
Yeah, I'm actually very interested from the perspective that we have utilizing HackerOne, right, where folks essentially just get to be able to test companies and then go for bug bounties and try and find things. How much protection does this actually provide for those type of folks, and has there actually been historically any problems with people who have legitimately signed up for these things where they're like, yeah, I'm going to help test this company and help tell them all the problems and situations they run into, and then all of a sudden they get sent a nice little nastygram from whatever company that they're trying to help. So I'm hoping this actually this type of stuff relieves some of that if anyone's ever ran into that problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think kind of those services like HackerOne is probably exactly why this type of change needed to be made, because I'm not a legal expert by any means, but I definitely have heard of stories before of well-meaning researchers finding things like vulnerabilities, but the thing is, in order to find a vulnerability, you do have to kind of have some interaction with that system usually, and there has been companies who have basically gone against these and after these researchers, essentially for just merely trying to help them out and disclosing something, not even necessarily asking for hey, I'm looking for to get paid, not even that. It was just an ethical hacker finding something and deciding, hey, I'm going to tell them about it, and then potentially getting into trouble because the company doesn't like having somebody finding their vulnerabilities, which there's a whole conversation to be had about responsible disclosure when it comes to vulnerability research and things like that.
Sure. One of the from from my perspective, one of the things that pop into my head is if you're a company and so, some kid, let's say it's some kid, someone who's just getting into security and just wants to start playing with things, and they happen to find this stuff. And by kid, I mean like people are getting into this younger and younger and younger, like 15, 14, just very, very, very young. They happen to find something. Well, you're basically going to change that kid's life by, as a company, coming to them and saying, you know what, you found this. This is awesome. Here's some money. Like, even if it's like $3,000, a couple $1,000s. I remember when I was a kid getting like $5. I was like, oh man, I got $5. I'm so excited. So if you're just digging into this stuff and you just happen to find something and a company will pay you for it, that leaves a very good, positive, lasting impression. And not even just from the kid, but also more of a public standpoint. I know there's all these potential other problems with it, but at the same time, like, we have to understand that not everyone's doing things for malicious reasons, and in a lot of cases, hackers historically were doing them because they wanted to try things and see if it works and see what happens.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the original mindset, the kind of basically why hacking became a thing was just people trying to say, like, well, how do I make this thing do something that it wasn't intended to do? Like, it's not necessarily for malicious reason, just out of curiosity. And you said, like, yeah, having a reward can change somebody's life, but the flip side of that is as well, like, it can change their life in a negative way as well if you have a company who does the opposite of that and says, hey, yeah, you found it, but I don't really, I didn't want to know about this. Now you made me look bad and my security team or whatever, so we're going to go after you, either so you don't disclose it or whatever. Like, if you're somebody looking to get into security and you do that, and like that'll probably very quickly kill your motivation when you're going to basically, kind of sit there thinking, oh, I thought I did something good, and all of a sudden, now I'm being served basically, a lawsuit that I have to potentially deal with. So that, I don't know about you, but that wouldn't exactly be something that would make me think, hey, I want to keep doing this. So, yeah, I think this is a fairly significant change. So yeah, let's see what happens. I'm really curious. I'm really kind of curious how this is going to go moving forward. Next, this is something that honestly I'll admit sounded like way more of a story than it is, and this coming from Info Security Magazine, and it's U.S. to treat ransomware like terrorism. Kind of thought this was going to be something a lot more interesting than what it was. The simplified version basically just says what the internal processes and like internal tracking methods that they use for tracking terrorism and stuff like that, and also the sense of urgency is going to be given to ransomware. So that's kind of really the long and short of that.
Slightly misleading headline there, I felt.
This is probably on a lot of folks' minds right now, but just I would say the headline itself, it does its job, right? It grasps you, and it makes you want to go in there. So clickbait maybe, but the thing that I've talked to many people, and the thing that's scaring folks in particular is, what is this escalation going to be? Like, not necessarily for the news, but for how do we make this stop? How do we make ransomware stop? And it's getting to the point where, is there actually going to be a physical response to some of these things in some way, shape, or form? And that's what we don't want any of us getting to. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anytime, you have government involvement and stuff like this, especially with that kind of language, it should kind of, at the very least, make you a little bit cautious, because there is always that, like, we literally just got, done talking about, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act being abused. So anytime you're going down that route, there's potential for essentially a slippery slope kind of scenario. So, all right. So, next one, again, another quick one, and this is also coming from Bleeping Computer. U.S. charges a Latvian for helping develop the TrickBot malware, and this is good because essentially, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but TrickBot is pretty well known, pretty prevalent, and apparently the Department of Justice ended up actually charging Alavite, I think, is the name. I don't know. I can't read. With 19 different counts on a 47-count indictment, basically for various various things, basically related to malware distribution, creation, etc. So this is good news. So I'm sure anybody that's on the analysis side, anybody who keeps up with security, I'm sure you've heard of TrickBot at some point or other. Yeah, well, all right, and possibly now my favorite story of the week. This is coming from the Register. The U.S. nuclear weapons bunker security secrets spill from online flashcards since 2013. This, I just laughed when I read this. This is I have no words. And this is like actually not really an exaggeration either. This is kind of exactly what happens. This is a very accurate headline. And I'm going to read a small little piece here. And it says, the astonishing security blunder was revealed by investigative journalism website Bellingcat, which described what it found after simply searching online for a term publicly known to be associated with nuclear weapons. The flashcards detail intricate security details and protocols such as the position of cameras, frequency of patrols around the vaults, secret duress words that signal when a guard is being threatened, and the unique identifiers that a restricted area badge needs to have. Yeah.
Well, when
that's kind
when
of
you're using
amazing.
the same online flashcard system that I probably used getting my Security Plus, you're in a good place.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, this is one of those things that it's a really, really good conversation about the importance of OPSEC. Because, yeah, it doesn't really kind of get any more sensitive when it comes to security than, nuclear weapons bunker.
Yeah. I would say that.
I mean, I used to be happy when I would find flashcards when I was studying for an exam in college, but nuclear weapons secrets, bingo.
Yeah. I honestly, again, I read this, it sounded like a joke, but apparently it wasn't. This is honestly, again, a whole topic in itself about operational security, but, at the very high level, this is all it takes. You can have all that security in place, but it just takes one thing, one lapse, to kind of make all of that really largely pointless, essentially. Because now, when you think about what do you have to do to kind of fix this, is essentially any of these processes that were exposed need to be likely kind of scrapped and start over. A lot of this stuff basically has to be changed, because things like knowing things like, the frequency of patrols and, some of these secret code words and stuff like that, kind of a big deal. You can't just be like, oh no, we took the flashcards down, we're good. So yeah, there's
an interesting story from last year that's actually linked from this article, talking about how last year a beer rating app was used to identify people who were working in sensitive positions at military facilities just based on pubs they were going to and then little bits of personal information in their profiles. People were able to figure out who these people were, what their roles were, just using publicly available information on LinkedIn and so forth. So maybe not quite as sensitive as some of the material on these flashcards, but it's just goes to show you how even a seemingly harmless app like a beer rating app can be used to cause problems for people professionally.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is, a lot of these applications, a lot of these websites, a lot of these services, I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that none of this stuff is inherently private. Like, you should never be working with the assumption of privacy when it comes to any of this stuff. In fact, like, a point of a lot of these things is to share that data out, because it's kind of meant to be a community thing. That's kind of, the strength of something like flashcards is basically making it and then sharing it out, and then other people improve it, or maybe they are looking for the same type of topic, or it's kind of meant to be a community thing. So
it's a lack of OPSEC as a business model.
Yeah. Well, why would you need OPSEC when it comes to things like, sensitive military installations or nuclear weapons?
There's always going to be a trust, right? Like there's going to be a give and take of everything. And I mean, things that we've suggested to people, we don't even tell people to utilize CyberChef online. And even though they're like, what's the likelihood of someone has popped CyberChef's main website or whatever, and they're utilizing that as negative? No, we still tell people, like, download CyberChef, put it on your system, utilize it from there, things like that. And I think from like the security perspective of things, we just need to focus a little bit on that. I mean, just some of the basics, right? Like, don't click on everything that you see. Don't don't expose more information just because you can't. I mean, don't even get me started about Google surveys and just people like going, yeah, I'm gonna get paid telling everybody my information. Like, oh God, you're killing me. But anyway.
Yep. I mean, honestly, I think OPSEC, that's a whole topic we can probably address at some point, because I think there's a big conversation to be had, both from, why that's important when dealing with things like actually APT-based incidents. But, in general, also from a security analyst perspective, I think one of the things that maybe isn't talked about that much when it comes to training, SOC folks is that OPSEC part of it and why that really matters. So I think definitely that's a topic to table for another time and get in depth with at some point. All right, folks. So that's it for the news roundup. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have the links to all of these stories in the episode description, and So
yeah,
that took a little while, but I think also there's a pretty decent handful of stories, and I think some of these do warrant a little bit of discussion as well. So okay, I guess we should move into the guest segment. The first guest segment.
I guess I guessed.
I quit.
First and last. After having me on, I'm just going to say, you know what, this is just not worth the trouble. So I'm just going to call it quits on this whole guest.
And not even because of you, mainly because Jason keeps stealing my puns.
Gotta be quicker, buddy.
I thought we had an honor system here. What the hell?
Yeah, well, so I would sit here and just interview Mr. John, but the fact of the matter is you know this fella, so I'm just going to shut up for a little while and let you folks talk.
We don't want you to shut up. We love the sound of your voice, Jason.
Oh man, that's the first time I've heard that in like 10 years.
And probably the last.
Yeah. Oh, are you gonna kill me? Like, what do I not know here? All right.
All right, so as I mentioned, I guess for this week is John, and he is a friend of mine. We actually been in Japan for about the same length of time here. So first of all, I guess John, why don't you just give a brief introduction of who you are and what got you into security, and anything else you want to say.
Yeah, definitely. So, thanks for the intro. Thanks for having me on. As a brief introduction, myself, I'm from the States originally. Like Alan said, we've been in Japan a fair amount of time now. I've moved around a little bit because I went back to college actually prior to shifting into this career. So I've moved around quite a lot the past several years. But as far as what got me into security, Alan, we were classmates at our Japanese language school, and that was at a time in my life where I was kind of figuring out what my career path was going to be moving forward, because prior to security, I had worked in politics, sort of in politics, not exactly, but close enough that I got a taste of it and realized it wasn't really what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So whilst I was having my kind of adventure studying abroad, I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go with my career. And once you sort of started introducing me to the field of incident response, cybersecurity generally, it really sounded like something that checked the boxes for me. I feel like if you have a certain drive to solve problems, figure things out, put the pieces of a puzzle together, this can be a very promising field. Certainly, there's no lack of growth in this field, unlike where I was previously, where the market is kind of oversaturated with a lot of competition. There's always more and more room for growth, and yeah, so that's kind of what got me into security, and went back to school, got my second degree, and then that kind of led me into my first position, which has launched this career that I'm trying to continue building. So sorry, that was longer of an intro than I intended, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
No, that's all good, man. So, in your case, basically you kind of went, and got an education, and your education was focused on kind of security. Um, so I guess very briefly, don't have to go in a lot of depth, but I'm just curious, like, what was your experience from the academic side of things uh, when it comes to kind of studying security? I'm just kind of curious how that went, and just overall, I guess, what your experience was with that.
Uh, I mean, overall, I think it was good experience in large part just due to the fact that I got to travel and live overseas, which was quite nice. As far as the academics itself went, I mean, it gave me a good foundation, which I feel is pretty valuable when trying to get past the initial barriers with hiring managers who, they want to see that you have a degree and some educational background. You know, Maybe some people feel that that's overemphasized, but I do think there's some value in terms of learning basic fundamental concepts of computing, things like the protocol stack for networking, simple stuff like that. Difference between UDP and TCP. That stuff is usually covered if you have, let's say, a bachelor's degree. As far as specific, applicable concepts that you're going to use practically day to day in security, I felt like most of that I had to start learning on the job. I just feel like maybe in academia, they're not as up to speed on that as like SANS is going to be, right? Because it's just not where they specialize. A lot of what you learn is going to be theoretical as opposed to practical. So I think it could be a subjective thing for people based on what they're expecting to learn obviously what kind of program they're in. I transferred from one college to another, and there was a very noticeable difference between schools in terms of exactly what kind of material they covered. But I don't think you're going to walk away feeling like you didn't learn anything of value, or that you don't have a bit of an advantage over somebody who has just come out fresh with no education or academic training. So, I think it's a mixed bag in terms of the percentage of practical material you're going to learn. But I definitely think you're going to be way better off conceptually than you would be without it. And I think it's a huge value when you're applying and trying to get interviews.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of why I was asking that, because in my experience, that's generally seems to follow basically the pattern, that same pattern where, like you said, it's useful as a step in the door. And even for me, I think it was kind of the same experience. Jason, I think if for you it was kind of something similar as well. So I'm just kind of curious, basically, to get an idea of whether that's just a commonality when it comes to education, especially in information security type related programs.
Yeah, aren't you just ecstatic to spend like $60,000 to get told how TCP works, and then get in an interview and then they're like, yeah, that's great, how TCP works, but like, have you ever looked at a log? And you're like, oh god, okay, thanks.
Wait, you mean this analysis job requires me to look at logs and analyze things? Why didn't anybody tell me this?
Life is so much different in the past 10 years.
Yeah. Yep, but also a slight correction on Jason's part there. $60,000. I wish I had only $60,000 of student loans.
Whatever.
I'm in so much debt.
Okay, well, just in my case, if I had been staying in the States continuously, then I probably would have qualified for in-state tuition in my state of residency, which would have been fairly inexpensive. But because I had been out of the U.S. for so long, it actually was cheaper and more cost-effective for me to study overseas. So that was part of why I did it. I wanted the experience of living in some other countries, the English-speaking countries, in addition to Japan and the U.S. So, that part of it was a really valuable experience. I think, if it's like a cost-benefit analysis, it's certainly, the price is high, right, to get a degree. I just felt like, if I want to get into a security role, just seeing the listings nowadays, the JDs that are asking for, some kind of bachelor's degree or something relevant, to me, it felt like it would pay off in the end. But I guess everybody's situation is different, and I'm sure you can learn everything that I learned without having to drop that kind of money on a degree.
Yeah, at some point, unfortunately, there is that aspect of, do you meet the HR checkbox? And there's a lot of HR out there who they still tend to just look for that. So I think at the very least, it does give you that. I think there's a separate conversation we're going to have, eventually in this series, whether that is necessarily the right way to do things or not. But, for better or worse, it does give you some paths with some HR folks that are kind of adamant about having that education requirement as well. So next, so can you talk a little bit about what is your current situation, and where are you at now?
Yeah, so currently I'm looking because the job that I was doing here in Tokyo was on a contract basis, and through some combination of factors, I'm sure that the current economic situation factored in, but that company's been downsizing, and of course contractors tend to be the first ones to go. So I've been looking for a little over 6 months now, and I've been searching both here in Japan as well as for remote jobs back in the States. I'm trying to stay located in Japan, but would, ideally like to work for a US based company. I've been applying to a lot of positions for third shift analysts in a SOC because, with the time zone difference, it's pretty much a perfect alignment in terms of working hours. And, I've been getting interviews here and there, in process currently with one company that actually sounds quite promising. But yeah, I've run into a lot of issues here in Japan with companies that are looking for very high level Japanese. I mean, I can speak Japanese, but not necessarily at the business level companies tend to want. And then for a lot of US companies, there's this issue of um, policy allowing, an expat to be working remotely. But there have been exceptions. And like I said, there's one I'm waiting to hear back on that actually sounds quite promising. But yeah, that's my situation as of now.
Cool. So yeah, it's actually quite a I wanted to ask that because your situation is definitely a little bit unique, and I think not that common. But yeah, it's very interesting to try to kind of make all of that work. And as you mentioned, Japan has its own issues when it comes to that type of stuff. I mean, we're gonna have a whole separate episode on that. But just to give a little bit of an idea to folks here, when we say business level Japanese, it's not like English where it's a matter of like, okay, you're just speaking a more polite English and kind of, cutting out the slang and stuff like that. Business Japanese is basically a whole separate language in itself almost. Like the grammar, the vocabulary, all of that stuff is very, very different. So that requirement can be, that can be a pretty high bar to overcome. And yeah, so we'll have a more in-depth discussion on that, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of background for folks, I guess, who weren't familiar with that. So in your case, John, you're kind of looking like what kind of opportunity would you like to go into next? Like what do you see? So I guess first, maybe you can talk a little bit about in the role you did have, what kind of experience that was, and then also like I guess what you're looking to get into next.
Yeah, definitely. So the role that I had prior to the end of last year, that was a general security operations role for a major multinational company. And it was kind of a mix of just about anything and everything related to security. Uh, you never really knew what you'd be doing on a daily basis. Could be very, very simple, straightforward stuff like just reviewing DLP alerts, or you could be working with people on different teams spread across the globe to resolve incidents that were related to Japan, or I could be writing documentation. I did a little bit of threat intelligence work specific to Japan. So it was a very, very mixed bag. And, that can, of course, be challenging at times just because, you can have priorities changing very rapidly. But the plus side of that is it gives you a lot of broad experience, which A, lets you get an idea of what it is you enjoy about security, and B, it gives you that experience that you can use moving forward, looking for new positions. And as far as what I'm looking for next, I feel like the natural progression is for me to find some kind of a SOC or SOC-like role where I'm just handling incidents day in, day out. There was a bit of that in the previous role, but I think something where that's the dedicated focus of the job and I'm getting that technical experience on a daily basis is what would really serve me best, because I feel like, and especially in this industry, and you guys can tell me if this is on the mark or not, but as you get that technical experience, that just opens doors for you, right? And opportunities are going to start presenting themselves to continue growing as a professional. So that's the kind of role right now that I think would be the best fit.
The thing that tends to get said a lot is as soon as you start having like anywhere between 6 months to a year straight of SOC experience, at least over in the States, it gets very, very difficult to not just start getting bombarded by recruiters on things like LinkedIn, as long as you've got your LinkedIn all set up to allow for folks to hit you up. But that 1 year experience is a pretty big barrier for a lot of folks, which is quite frustrating. And we'll also talk a little bit about that later. But the actual technical landscape of things is just it's going to change. It's going to be a very interesting next couple of years, and we'll kind of get into that as soon as we jump into the topic.
To me, it kind of makes sense to go in that particular direction, just because it does. I think it does open a lot of those doors. It does tend to solidify your experience a little bit, and also, I don't know, to me at least, kind of looking back at what I consider to be, the most valuable was my SOC experience where, and I'm not, obviously this can vary depending on how your SOC is run and the quality of it and what exactly you're doing on your day-to-day, but exposing yourself to, kind of having to do analysis, having to think like an analyst, having to develop that skill set on a daily basis, I think really is something that can really kind of launch your career and open a lot of doors, but also have some side benefits of by getting exposed to a lot of different things. That can show you, help you decide what to focus on going forward.
And Bill Murray said it best when he said, "You don't want us exposing ourselves."
No one wants you exposing yourself, Jason. Thankfully, this is an audio podcast, so we don't have to worry about it.
All right. So what kind of following up on that, what is it you'd actually like to do? Like, do you have an end goal as far as what your career is, or?
Yeah, so based on the little tastes that I've gotten so far of actual incident response, I mean, that was a sliver of what I would work on regularly in my previous role. That to me, I mean, that was the kind of work that sounded exciting prior to even transitioning into this field. And the times I did get to do that kind of work in that role were the most rewarding. And I feel like that certainly that's something that as I get more experience, I think there'll be more opportunities to do. I think SOC will provide a lot more chances to do that kind of work specifically. So moving forward, I'd like to get more experience doing that, get a better feel for what that kind of work entails. But, my sense is that I'll find it quite enjoyable. So I think that could be a natural end goal. I also do think, just because I have a background in politics and worked a bit on the threat intel stuff for Japan, that could be something I could explore as well. But I think for right now, the immediate focus for me is just to get the technical experience. And I think that will give me a good sense of, exactly what kind of path I want to head down moving forward.
Sure. Yeah, we'll get in. Like I said, we'll be digging into that here in just a few seconds, because what's needed, what's expected, it's going to differ from a lot of different companies, but for the most part, we're seeing a progression. Just as the joke, as we joked earlier, 10 years ago, the questions that came in for security were like, "Oh, what is TCP? And can you provide some details about it?" And nowadays, it's a little bit more focused. It tends to be a little bit more focused, and folks are looking for a little bit more of the exploration and interest, more so than it is about knowing, knowing the OSI model and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's, again, we'll get into that. But to me, that's the right way to go at it. But unfortunately, it's not necessarily a view that I think is prevalent in the industry at the moment. Sadly, that type of mindset is still kind of the exception instead of the rule. But hopefully that changes. So, all right. I think, that covers quite a bit of what we wanted to cover. So, since we've been talking for quite a while, I think this is a good place for us to take a short break. So, thank you for listening up until this point, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, and let's keep this thing going. So, as we mentioned, I guess we should just get into our main topic of the week, which is kind of a weird thing to say considering the fact that we've been talking for a little less than an hour already. But yeah, let's get to it. So as we mentioned earlier, our main topic for this week is going to be dealing with recruitment, and this is the part one of that. We have a couple of topics within that that we're going to cover, and first, we're going to talk a little bit about the job landscape and the current state of the industry. And we're going to kind of keep it fairly high level and very broad. Like, we'll get into some specific industries and things like that in some of the other podcasts as well. For example, like the one focusing on Japan. So I just kind of want to have a discussion here about what are we currently seeing, what does the landscape look like, because obviously there's been a lot going on with the pandemic, with some high profile breaches and stuff like that have inevitably had some effect on the industry. So yeah, let's just go and start off with that. So I guess why don't you start off, Jason, for the US side of things and what you've been seeing, and then John and I can talk a little bit about the Asia side of things in Japan.
All right, cool. Yeah, from the job landscape side, jobs that are opening up here, at least a good portion of the ones that I've been seeing, and there's so many websites, everybody, on that's out there, and it's not just like going to Indeed.com or anything like that. In particular, some of the really good ones are like Ninja Jobs. Has great folks on there that reach back out to you, have conversations, and then will tell you like, oh, we're gonna push your stuff over to whatever this job is. But the most of what we're seeing and what we're all afraid of over here, obviously, is ransomware, and that is in of itself driving a couple different things forward. Some of those being, people are looking for more detection. People are looking for more response capabilities, quicker response capabilities. But the problem that we end up falling into is that doesn't necessarily mean junior jobs. It tends to mean like people are looking for seniors. People are looking for folks with 5 to 10 years of experience for things, and it's getting rough, and they're moving a lot of these junior jobs out to outside the states. From our perspective, they're moving a lot of the junior stuff outside the states, and just making it even more difficult for the people 4 or 5 years from now to have a job, to become a senior or have that senior type of experience. The other thing that I have, over the course of about 2 weeks, went from rarely seeing and mostly just being in called security engineering, but I'm now actually starting to see security operations engineering or security operations automation jobs. This, to me, I actually think is where we are going to head. As an industry, as a field, where we're going to have less and less actual stateside SOC folks, and more like, hey, for 5 or 6 different SOC analysts, we're only going to have maybe one actual SOC automation person, push the rest off to an MSSP, or push the rest off to out of country, which, you know, there's benefits to a lot of these, a lot of the different reasons why you would do things like that. But we hear a lot of complaints from our side and our people, the folks I talk to constantly, which is, oh gosh, there's not enough candidates. We need more people to apply to things. We need blah, blah, blah. And the pandemic helped a good chunk of that for the companies willing to let it. Remote work is a huge deal. So we are hoping to see more remote work. And we have seen a spike of that over the past quarter. And now that people got into those jobs, I'm also hearing those same people saying, yeah, now they're trying to make me move to Texas. It's like, oh no, this is just going right back to where it was. What the heck's your problem? So,
yeah. A couple of interesting points there, that you brought up is that whole thing of outsourcing and, moving those jobs either abroad or outsourcing to an MSSP. Like, I have some pretty kind of strong feelings about that. And I'm sure that'll be a topic we'll probably revisit, but it seems almost to me like every few years that becomes a thing, and then inevitably it goes poorly, and then everybody kind of pulls back on it a little bit, and then like a goldfish, basically we as an industry entirely forget that was a bad idea, and then we do it again. Because I feel like every few years I'm hearing about, we're outsourcing our security stuff to wherever, and then inevitably, some other CISO comes in and decides they want to bring it back, or to an MSSP, kind of the same thing, really. So I don't know. It's really strange to me that you would, like you said, move a lot of the junior jobs out because you're kind of cutting off, your own, local industry at the kneecap by doing that. Because if you don't have a way in, like how do you satisfy the senior requirement if you can't get the experience to even become a junior to start off? So like, honestly, just like my view on a lot of the outsourcing stuff, it seems like a very short-term thinking.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always going to be that peaks and valley where just folks decide to do it one way, then something will happen, money goes down, and then we're like, oh, now we got to deal with the fact that money went down, and just because of the way that the natural state of business is, we kind of wig out, we freak out about it, and go like, we have to get rid of all of this stuff in order to make sure that either shareholders are happy or the expected budgets are being hit properly, whatever, what have you. I mean, unfortunately, it's basically coming down to saying, oh yeah, we're all just numbers. I hate to think of it that way, but that's what it tends to be, and it's just more of us trying to figure out how do we make those numbers align to a better representation of what we are doing for the company. And I think metrics, a lot of the way that folks have metrics right now and how it's presented, that's what's causing a little bit of that issue, because people are getting just that, oh, well, we're able to hit all of our goals by getting response times down to blah, or being able to hit all of these different target goals based off of whatever regulation is there, when the fact of the matter is like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean good security. It's a generalized decent amount of operation. Doesn't mean good security. But
yeah, I mean, honestly, this again, I think ties into that bigger conversation when it comes to things like compliance and audit and having that essentially be your security posture as well. But yeah, the whole idea of metrics, like, they're valuable, obviously, but they never tend to really tell the whole picture. And the other part of that is, how many of the places that are using this type of, KPI and metrics and things like that, how many of them are actually doing it with, a decent or fairly complete, data set? So like the metrics is only
Sure.
only going to be as valuable as the data that's basically driving it. So
And in many cases, they tailor it to what message they want to provide. I mean, it's pretty rare to find a manager who says, "Oh, hey, that is not good, but I'm going to report it." They usually, in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I don't know if it'll upset people by saying that, but that's just kind of how it is. You're trying to make something look better than what it may actually represent, and trying to gain explanation for things that may not have a proper explanation, or an easy explanation that someone like an HR team would be able to understand. And that's where a lot of this metrics drives tend to come from, is like, hey, you want bodies, you have to prove that you need bodies, and the only way we understand it is through numbers. So it's such a catch-22 and such a difficult situation, that in most cases it's hard to try and change that like fundamental understanding of how do we know we need more people. Just like that type of question is very, very difficult to answer for people who don't have full scale metrics.
yeah, but that's yeah, it's like you said, it's definitely like a snake eating its own tail type of situation. Um, the thing is, in a perfect world, ideally your metrics should be a true reflection of your actual operations and how things are working, and whether that paints a good picture or a bad picture is kind of irrelevant, because as long as it's accurate, it's what allows you to then act on that and take that next step and do something about it. But that's often very much not the case. But to me, the reason that I have a problem with that type of approach, metrics-driven approach, over everything else, is, you can have that say whatever you want it to say, and at a certain point, are you doing yourself more harm than more harm than good by doing that? Like, a simple example to me is like, you can have a good metric that's like, look, our response time for phishing mail is like 30 minutes, and our average ticket takes about takes 30 minutes to an hour to resolve. And maybe that looks really good from a metrics perspective, but what that maybe isn't telling you is that your analysts are feeling like they have to work within some very stringent time constraints, and how good is the quality of the work they're doing. So at that point, are you really doing yourself any favors, especially when you kind of juxtapose that with the idea that, okay, all these companies are now worrying about things like ransomware and all of this stuff. Well, it's like, how worried are you really when you're focusing more on metrics and how pretty that looks versus actually doing a good job? So, it also ends up tying back into things like, the outsourcing part of it. One of the reasons I have a problem with that, either to an MSSP or to, out of country, I guess, is because, to me, I think there's a lot of views that the junior analysts, the folks doing triage, the eyes on glass type of people, essentially, are, that can be done by anyone. And to me, like, I don't really believe that. I don't really think that's a good mindset, because the way I'm looking at it is, your level 1 folks, your folks doing triage, should probably be the ones you spend the most time with, because at the end of the day, if you're not supporting them well, if they aren't trained well enough to do the triage process properly, and that doesn't just mean, hey, if I see this, I send it to this team, like, that means you're going to miss stuff. That means if your level 1 doesn't see it and you close it off as a false positive, then your level 2 is never going to see it. Your senior is never going to have a chance to see it, and you'll find out about it when all of a sudden, your domain controller is owned and you can't do anything.
Sure. It's back to the problem of the fact that all of our jobs and all these things that seem to be open are senior jobs. One can say that, oh, the junior jobs are just getting filled faster, but I mean, unless they're getting filled within the day they're being posted, I don't believe that. There's so many different situations there, and from a person coming in with like little to no experience, it's almost defeating. And we already are a entire industry or field full of people with imposter syndrome, where they believe the imposter syndrome is what's holding them back. And if we're not helping stop that, and like, as a person who doesn't even believe I deserve anything that I've got right now, and I have a little bit of that mentality, that imposter syndrome, I still just don't. I try not to let it. I try not to let it get to me, and I just keep making stuff up as I go along. But I do understand how, if you're just coming into a field like this, it's impossible to try and wrap your head around the fact that you just need to do the best you can and be the best person you can, and that's all we care about. That's all we want from you. We don't want you to be better than your peer that you're going to be working with. We don't want you to be better than this like A plus 4.0 student, 4.3 student, or whatever number they want to make up with. Like the fact of the matter is we want to help you as a person, and if you're willing to put time in yourself, we want to do that for you. And that's not really what jobs are suggesting by not providing all of these junior positions. If we look for only seniors, we're basically saying we want you to figure all this stuff out yourself, and we don't want to help you.
Yeah, and the other problem with that ends up becoming, that it basically just makes the only kind of realistic way of recruiting junior talent is through networking, and by having somebody, who is senior, who does have some influence at a company, saying like, look, no, like, I'm willing to take a chance on this person, and I'm basically essentially waging my own experience and putting that on the line to say like, look, I'm willing to speak for this person because I think they were going to be, they could bring something to the table. But if you don't have that, it does make it very, very difficult to make your case. And it really is a big issue, because like you said, what happens 5-10 years down the line when maybe there isn't these seniors people anymore, that they're retiring or moving on to something else, or maybe even moving into management. Where is like what is going to continue to feed the industry? Like, if we think that problem is bad now, like, what is it going to be later when we're doing nothing to kind of cultivate that talent, essentially? And I know it's not because there isn't enough people who are interested in it.
Right.
So
there's tons. I mean,
yeah.
There are literally like probably hundreds of Discord servers of people that are just poking around, lurking, looking for that opportunity for them, even to have interviews. I see folks every single day in some of our personal channels who are talking about like, oh, I'm on my 7th job, I'm on my 7th interview, I'm on my 8th interview, and asking them like, oh, what ended up happening? They tend to say like, oh, someone with in most cases, it's someone with more experience, or they've already been in these jobs or roles before, got picked up over me, so I just need to get better at what I do. And that's great, that's fine. And quite frankly, I'm hearing one of the repeat things I'm also hearing is folks saying like, oh, I just want a bunch of people that does things for themselves. And it's an archaic way of thinking. Like, folks, seriously, us trying to focus on, I only bring people in that help themselves and do things for themselves. It's not the right generation to be saying that anymore. We are in a situation now where we are we feel like we're Disney. We're all in this together, right? The fact that's a fact, and the people want to be able to come in and feel like they have a team helping them get to a goal, and not feel like they have to be the ones that got themselves to the goal. And that, in my opinion, is 100% okay. And we just have to be in a situation where we foster a good positive atmosphere with that type of thinking, instead of this combative situation where it feels like some folks just kind of write that off and go, nope, I'm not even going to deal with this person because they came in. We don't know what that person's life has gone through. We don't know, has that person been in a situation where family has just passed away before or within like a span of a year of this happening, and maybe they just need that other person or that group of people to help them out of it. There's a lot of those type of situations where once that person was able to flourish and gain some support, they change the world. I mean, they don't necessarily change the world, but they certainly change the aspects of the world, their own world and the environment. And that is something we are just 100% moving away from if all we focus on is bringing in these people with X amount of experience, but all they want is this specific job, and we don't evolve, we don't change. I want us as an industry to constantly change, constantly evolve, because that's what attackers are doing. And if we stay in this same boat, we're never going to change ourselves, and we'll just keep getting owned.
So basically what I'm hearing is I should move to Russia and work for Fancy Bear.
I have certainly been thinking of, like, ransomware as a service sounds like a great idea. But
and we can get, if we go to Russia, we can get Steven Seagal to help. I heard he knows people.
Oh man, that would be so wonderful. I mean, quite frankly, the only thing that I'd have a battle with him in is donut eating, but whatever.
You would definitely lose. Have you seen Seagal lately?
No body shaming, Alan. No, I don't know. I haven't seen him.
Yeah. So just to go a little bit back on that point, though, you mentioned, things like there's an expectation of folks to just get there on their own. And that's not to say that you shouldn't be doing anything. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit once we get to interviewing and things like that. I'm currently doing a lot of that. You do kind of need to at least be able to demonstrate that, you have a passion for it, that you are that you have a genuine interest. But that doesn't have to mean, like you're moving heaven and earth, basically having to prove that you're worth someone's time. But just being able to speak to your passion, being able to speak to your interest, I think is very important. And generally, if your interest is genuine, that should never be a difficult question to speak to.
Sure, and the biggest one of the issues with that is we don't know or understand what's the best way to judge passion. Like one of the things that I was told in some of my previous interviews that I've had is things like passion is going and putting yourself in debt and then trying to get into that landscape for that job. And I don't that's the stuff I don't agree with. Like if your choice is go out and get a certification, spend $7,000 or $8,000 and not be able to pay for your family, or be in a situation where like you now are overly stressed of money because you had to pull out a loan for this $7,000 or $8,000 certification, and you felt like that was the only way for you to get in the industry. That's wrong. That's terrible and awful. And coming from we're in that right now, or you're in that right now. I ended up I got my AA from University of Phoenix. It was a boatload of money, nowhere near yours, but still, like 40 grand, I think it was like 40 or 45 grand for an AA, and then moving over to getting my bachelor's for 12 grand. I think it was like 12 to 15 grand from WGU. That those aren't small chunks of money. That's a heck of a lot of money for something that I didn't technically need. Like I wanted to get the education for the bachelor's.
For the HR checkbox, basically.
Right, yeah.
That's what it really ends up being.
Yeah. So
And yeah, that's the problem. We're going to talk about that from the interview side of things. But to me, yeah, no, anybody expecting you to get in debt and calling that passion is a person I never want to work for. And that's not the right way to look at that at all. So yeah, I mean, kind of we talked a little bit, and I think John, since you actually been interviewing, like how has does that echo some of what we've been talking about, at least from your perspective, in terms of kind of some of those expectations and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies a fair bit from company to company. I've definitely had experiences where, the role that I was applying for, right, I think the expectation was that they were looking for somebody who was a bit more experienced, a bit more senior, and had more, hands-on experience dealing with forensics and things like that. I've had other roles where the issue, like I said, came back to me just being located outside of the States. They seemed happy enough with my current experience and education background. I mean, I don't know I can necessarily speak to what it's like for people who are completely fresh and have not gotten any experience, because I was quite lucky, right, to be able to land a role out of college and get that year and a half or so of experience working in not quite a SOC, but a similar enough environment that, hiring managers seem to think it's checking that box of has at least some experience plus the degree. So, I mean, I don't know, the sense I'm getting, I definitely am seeing a disproportionate amount of senior roles when I'm searching for positions in the States. And I've also had other interviews, even here in Japan, where, the role was not senior, but I would take these technical exercises and tests that would be very, very specific in the kinds of knowledge that they wanted. And then just didn't hear back or didn't want to move forward if I didn't have that. But to me, felt like, maybe they were looking for somebody who was more mid-level to senior. So that's definitely out there. I am, like I said, getting interviews with companies that seem interested in hiring people who are junior, but I think they still want to see some experience, right? I mean, one company I know has said that they do hire people fresh out of college. But I think when you see, especially on some of these websites, I see the number of people who apply for these roles can be well over 100. Indeed will just show you 10 to 100 or 100 plus. And a fair number of them are 100 plus. So I think having some work experience absolutely makes me stand out. And I'm very fortunate that I at least have that, even though it may not seem like a lot. I think it puts you a couple of orders of magnitude ahead of people who don't have any experience. I think for them, it probably is going to be very rough. I mean, I'm finding it challenging. So without any experience, I feel like it would be a lot harder.
Did you say rough because it's malware wolf? Rough.
Wouldn't that be woof?
Well, in Japan it's one. So
There's going to be a lot of editing of bad jokes out of this, isn't there?
Nope, just you.
Just edit the whole thing. Just lower the decibel level to 0 for the entire thing.
If you hate Jason's jokes, please leave a comment.
I'm just gonna bleep every single time you start talking. How about that, huh?
That's not nice.
I've got the power. All right, so how about you, Alan? What do you got for overall landscape and what you see?
Yeah, so Japan is unfortunately kind of its own thing. Mainly in the sense that the industry here, I think, is very, the focus is very different because they're kind of, I firmly believe Japan is about a 15-year behind the rest of the world when it comes to the state of this industry. When I say that, what I mean is, like, you mentioned before, like, things are moving towards automation, things is moving towards, senior roles when it comes to security, things like that, and IR. Japan really doesn't have a lot of specialized roles when it comes to security in general. So that part's a bit tough because it makes it, it makes it very difficult to break into this industry here, especially also given the fact that there's not really much local talent because that's just not a focus here. I think software engineering is something that people tend to focus on a lot more than security necessarily. So they very much have a very, very large shortage of folks in this industry, but they're also kind of doing nothing to make it any better. And the expectations and the way the recruitment works here is, it's, we'll get into specifics, but it can be very unrealistic, even compared to the stuff you're seeing in the States. A lot of the times, like, because they're so far behind, like the specific, the role almost are not broken down when it comes to security. It's more like, okay, you're the IT guy, but you're also the security guy, you're also the compliance and audit guy, you're the project manager for anything security, oh, and you're also an engineer. There's a lot of that, which, obviously that's something that is not really the case in the States anymore. As far as whether things are changing, I do think they're at least in the past few months or so, it seems like hiring has started to pick up a little bit more. Even here, I'm starting to see a little bit more focus on things like IoT and automation, mostly with some of the larger companies, which kind of tracks with what you mentioned as well. But in terms of things like, junior roles, things like SOC type positions, or dedicated incident response roles, they're still very, very kind of few. It seems like kind of most of the security work here tends to be focused on the consulting side of things. They're very, very aggressive in that sense. I think both John and I have had experience dealing with the big four consulting firms here, just because they tend to kind of be the only ones who are pretty much kind of perpetually hiring. Whether they're hiring technically, for the right roles or for the roles that are aligning with our interests or what we're looking for, that's kind of a different topic. But in broad strokes, like, yeah, you can see some changes. I think there's a lot more effort recently with certain companies emerging, like with some of the emerging markets, things like mobile payments and stuff like that. These companies are trying to give the impression that they're a little bit more international, a little bit more like modern, I suppose, in the way they operate. So you'll see things coming up with them, but even that tends to more focus on like the web application security side of things. So yeah, it's getting better. When is it going to get to the point, I think, that it's maybe keeping up with the States or Europe? That's going to be a big question, because one of the big issues with Japan is they're very risk averse. They're very averse to change, and the security industry, kind of by definition, is in constant state of changing. So that's a very big adjustment for these companies that are very traditional and very much set in their ways, and they don't want to take any risk or change anything. So, like, until they have a reason to, and they have a very big reason to, like, for example, we saw a couple of high-profile ransomware attacks on Japanese companies in the past few weeks, with AXA, the big insurance company, being affected worldwide by a ransomware attack, and then Fujifilm, I think last week, they were hit as well. So my expectation is going to be, yeah, those companies are all of a sudden going to have a bunch of hirings for security related positions, but whether that's going to lead to any sort of change in, the culture of that company and how they view security, that's hard. It's hard to tell, really, because they're just so. It's just so hard to kind of get these people who are running these companies to change when you still have them doing things like using fax machines. So,
oh, jeez.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's
My favorite example is having assistants print off the emails to read them.
yeah. So yeah, that's a real thing. Is the fact that all of a sudden you're switching to remote work, and one of the reasons remote work isn't really taking off in Japan as much as it did maybe in the States is because of that. Is because you have a lot of these managers who are just technology averse, and that now having to teach them how to manage a VPN connection, how to go on Zoom and make sure their webcam is working, and how to do all that stuff, is they just they don't have time for it, or rather they don't want to give it the time. So for them it's much easier to say, no, I'm just going to make you come into the office so that way I can I can watch what you do. And the other part of that is that Japan still has the very much that mindset of remote work of well, if I can't see you working, then are you really working type of stuff, to the point where
Sure.
I wish I was making this up, but when I moved into my current place, I took a taxi, and taxis here have a little built-in screen, so you can kind of watch TV. And one of the commercials was literally for a company and software they make that essentially is hey, are your workers being lazy? Are you sure they're in front of their chair when they say they're working? And it's literally software to monitor people, and almost in a very big brother way to be no, you're sitting in front of your computer staring at your screen and actually working. And I remember looking at it going this is this sums up everything wrong with the industry here in one kind of go.
That's incredible, and I also need it.
But that's what you're dealing with, is this is the type of mindset that these companies are having. So even for me, and I consider myself at this point a senior level person, it's difficult.
Look,
because
you're a senior, but not because of that.
Yes, I'm old. Shut up. I'm also a señor, but
Yeah.
but yeah, it's tough. Even for me, it's tough for John. It's tough for me. I also kind of lucked out with my current role, because it kind of checks a lot of my boxes and what I want to be doing, and one of them being remote work. But remote work in Japan is almost non-existent. During the pandemic, when the rest of the world was saying, oh, we're 70, 80, 90% going remote, at its peak Japan was at 30. So that is
I'm not laughing at you, I'm laughing with you.
Oh no, I'm laughing at the state of the industry when it comes to that. We literally have a global pandemic that makes it government saying don't go into the office, and these companies going, no, we're going to keep going into the office. Which, yeah, I don't even know what to say to that. But I do think it's going to change, because I think it has to change. It's just a matter of how fast is that going to really happen. Because nothing in Japan changes fast, unfortunately. I've been here for 6 years, and I will say there has been progress, but I'm still firmly of the belief that it's going to take some seismic event to really change the scope here. Something that's going to basically be a stain on the country as a whole, and put a spotlight on them. Something like the Olympics being affected, for example, or something of that scope to make them care. Because then it becomes a PR issue, right? But until that happens, it's really difficult, because I'll have recruiters contacting me saying hey, this company they're paying amazing, and so good, like, and they're like cutting edge, and they want to make a world class, security operations center, and then you talk to them, and then it's like, oh yeah, your idea of a world class operations center is what, like a very basic level security operations center from like 20 years ago. But to them, that's cutting edge because they don't know any better. And
Sure.
advertising things like, oh, it pays so well, and then it's like, oh, we pay roughly about 90,000 for a senior level, essentially almost like a SOC manager / like IR team lead who also does PM and compliance and audit, and you're everything to all people. But to them, like, that's a lot of money because that's where the industry is at. So, yeah, there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go, I think, here.
I think just to provide, just before we kind of like jump into the next little piece here, to provide some ideas or a summary of things that I would highly suggest for folks to really look into where the future might be, and this is like future state of security in total. Orchestration and automation is a big thing. Getting your hands on some Python, getting your hands on some kind of scripting, getting your hands on some just Go, like learning some Golang and doing some of that goodness. They're going to be extremely beneficial. One of the things I also forgot to mention was that TI jobs are going to very likely increase over the next year, just because that was like one of the main points for the the White House government suggestions, is to make sure that you have like threat intelligence teams and they're doing threat intelligence things and all of that stuff. So we might see a lot of that coming up soon as well. And the best suggestion I have for that is understand the indicators. Don't just collect them. Don't just find them. Understand them. What does it mean to you? And that sounds really stupid, but the fact of the matter is like we're in a controlled environment, right? Like our controlled environment is the computer. So we have a limitation here, and that limitation of indicators exists in some way, shape, or form. So when you start understanding like what is a domain and how does it represent it as an indicator, and not just like, oh hey, here's something I throw to someone, it can increase it can increase what that may provide to you as a means to be able to protect your company. Instead of saying, oh hey, I've got some indicators, you might be finding some kind of correlation to say that, this actual indicator is in this specific part of the overall behavior of this application. Maybe we should start building alerting or identification around how this execution happens, instead of focusing specifically on cows.exe or focusing on, oh, hey, there's a hash. By the way, that was a blank hash, so it's going to hit all over the place anytime you create a fake text document. That was one of the big things there.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly, again, another one of those topics that I think it almost warrants its own podcast, basically, and its own conversation, just talking about what actually is threat intelligence, like what makes it useful, what makes it good, how do you do that well, how do you do that the right way, instead of just saying, hey, I pulled down a bunch of OSINT, I searched for it, I don't have any hits, and that is essentially my entire operational process when it comes to that. It's much more nuanced, I think, so we'll definitely talk about that a bit more. All right, so we talked enough about that particular topic, so we'll move into our next subtopic here, and that's talking about personal goals and expectations. And I think there's a little bit of crossover from what we talked about before already, as far as kind of what to expect based on just where the industry is, and also some of the things maybe you should be doing. But we want to expand a little bit on that conversation as well here. So I'll let you get started with that, Jason.
Yeah, because I I seem to be good at just like making a whole bunch of nonsensical points. Sure.
Isn't that the whole reason people have podcasts?
Sure. Yeah. You know what? You've just justified my whole entire existence. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, I'm good like that.
Some of the things regarding like personal goals, regarding what you should feel about it. We talked a little bit about that imposter syndrome, right? Like I want to bring it out front and center that it becomes very, very difficult to build out your own set of goals. It becomes very difficult to know what you should expect out of a company when you go in there, when you don't even feel that great about yourself in the first place. And the fact of the matter is, like it's to talk to your peers, talk to the people that you know care about you, and have these conversations about what do they think. Now, if you go to your dad or your mom or loved ones and say like, hey, what do you think I should ask for when you go into a company? That may not be the right person to ask. However, if you know somebody who's in the field, have these conversations with them. It shouldn't be taboo to be like, hey, what do you think a good going rate would be for X, Y, or Z? You don't have to sit there and talk to them about their own, how much they're making. You can research it online, sure, that's no problem. But get some information about what that person has done as far as money wise, but also talk to them about their skills. Like, what did you do to get where you are and to make that initial jump? In a lot of cases, in fact, I would say in most of the cases I can think of right now off the top of my head, they all tend to revolve around, oh, well, I knew a friend, and that friend helped me get to where I am. In fact, the two people on this podcast with Alan are kind of in that situation. I can name off the top of my head at least 3 people who I've worked with for quite some time who are in those same situations where it's just like, hey, I knew somebody and that person helped me, whether it be through training, whether it be through actually getting them in front of the right people to allow me to get me to where I am. And this goes back to one of those like life-changing aha moments. So I'm not going to take too much time out of here, but if you ever get a chance to see Lost Boy speak, do it. He is also just goes by Lost. I don't even know what his Twitter is, but we went to DEF CON. Alan took me to DEF CON, basically first year of security. And one of those resonating things was, don't come here to DEF CON and go see all these different conferences. They're great. The conferences are fantastic, but talk to people. Just have those conversations. Now, I have severe social anxiety, so that never happened. But I took that to heart, and through that and understanding that and nurturing that myself, I've been able to what the best way I could describe it is grow as far as I possibly could have by knowing so many people out here in Arizona in the Valley, and that's I mean, there's a lot of things that I end up relying on strictly because of the people that I know, and it's in many ways I feel like the only reason why I'm successful in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's like not some revelatory thing to say like networking is important for every job, but like it's so important in this industry because I think a lot of people maybe forget that how small of an industry this actually is. Like, maybe it appears much bigger from the outside than it actually is, but like we talked about it last time, but like there's a few degrees of separation basically, between almost everybody in this industry. So that like having that network, both support network, but also just people that can help you out in terms of whether that's looking for work, what to study next, what to focus on, like it's very, very important. And it's also something that, again, it can kind of go both ways. Like the flip side of that is, and one thing I learned very early is, because we are a very small industry, that means everything you do tends to be reflected, which means you can't really exist in a vacuum. So for example, I'm sure all of us here have some pretty crappy jobs that we wanted to just quit in the worst possible way. But the reason you don't end up doing that is because, for that brief moment of satisfaction you get out of it, you have potentially cost yourself, better jobs down the line, because somebody you work with, or somebody you work with that went somewhere else and knows somebody else that you're going to work with or try to work with in a different company. Now all of a sudden you have a reputation, because everybody talks to everybody, and when the industry is very small, and I don't even mean that just in the States, I mean globally. So
Sure, and the one thing I want to bring up off of that is something that I've seen as I don't know if I call it a trend, but one of the things that I've seen a lot of people start saying is that they will not take criticism or suggestions from people that they don't respect. And the fact of the matter is I don't actually believe that, because there's going to be people that you, in every single field, in every single industry, that you may not actually respect in some way, shape, or form, but there's a comment or information that can help change your life. So don't just turn your brain off. Don't just ignore. Understand, and we have to be in that type of mentality where we extract that information to determine whether or not it's something we need to change our life for, and then we move forward. But it's a very difficult situation right now, because like people right now are they have a voice anytime they want because of the internet. And so now all these people who are trolls get to just like say all these very negative things. So that's where I think a lot of this started originating from. But the fact of the matter is like, if somebody is in the field, they probably and have experience. That experience is telling them in their own way that they should be doing something in some form, some way, shape, or form. And it's not that you have to respect it, but you have to understand that there's probably a hint of truth, a little grain of truth in there that may be useful to you to help change your life. And yeah, that's what we're all trying to do, is just make better lives for ourselves.
I mean, yeah, I mean, honestly, like that's another topic I kind of want to cover at some point, is just that whole idea of one, mentorship, and taking on criticism, and the idea of failure and stuff like that, because all of those things were something that I think were very formative for our own careers, because we were lucky enough to be in a positive environment and surrounded by people who foster that in a positive way. But I definitely kind of feel like, yeah, there's a much bigger conversation to have there, because of how important all of that is, and having that right mindset, whether you're, just as a SOC analyst, but just more as just a person in this industry, and like having that positive mindset that allows you to help other people, whether it's getting them into the industry, whether it's supporting their path through the industry. Like, it really, to me, it's honestly one of the biggest things I tend to look for now that I'm interviewing people and looking for stuff like that, is because it was so important for me. And I don't know where I would be if my experience was more negative in that sense, but I definitely know, at least for me and Jason, from where we kind of started, we really kind of hit the jackpot in that sense with the type of people and with the right way of thinking, which has informed the way we think and the way we act, and view the industry as a whole, honestly. And that's now what, 9-10 years later, and those people are still kind of the people I look at and really am thankful for having the experience of, working with and working under and learning from. And that really has never
and they're
changed.
Still mentoring.
Exactly.
Yeah, like
100%.
the crazy thing is, like, there's still folks that we can go to, and still folks that are helping us when we need it. And it's hard to find that. I mean, most people tell you'll only have like a handful of friends in your entire life, but I feel like I've got at least 3 or 4 lives worth of friendships in just in that job alone. So like it was a very lucky situation that we got in, and it was like this weird combination of people that all seem to have that same, hey, we want to help each other be successful type of mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And we're definitely going to get into that, because that is something we do want to talk about a lot more, just because of, how important we think that experience was. But yeah, I just wanted to mention here very briefly. So take it back a little bit. So when we talk specifically about things like goals and expectations, even if you kind of go all the way back, one of the reasons, we asked John, like, kind of, what was your background? Where are you looking to go? What are you interested in? Is because I think you kind of need to have that idea. I think one of the things that's very important when you're kind of getting into this industry is, like, first of all, do enough, like Jason said, talk to people who actually work in this industry, and first of all, figure out whether this is actually something that you want to be doing before you commit to it. Because it's not for everybody. That's just really the bottom line. Like, this type of work, this type of industry is not for everybody. We all know stories about burnout. We all know stories about, people who just aren't a good fit for various reasons, whether maybe, like I mentioned before, maybe they're not a good mentor, maybe they're not a good team player, maybe they just found out it's not the thing that they thought it would be. But to save yourself some headaches, I really think that's kind of should be one of the first things for folks looking to get into this industry to consider. Even if you're just, if it's a hobby, if you're doing that in school, as we mentioned earlier, academics can be very different than real world. Like, find somebody who's actually doing the work. Find somebody who, hopefully can speak to both the junior roles, the senior roles, what is the good, what is the bad, and really think about that. Like, is this for me? Like, for example, one of the things that got me interested in this industry is because, so both me and Jason have a background in kind of customer service, but not really technical work, right? That's, it was, hey, go ahead and unplug your modem and plug it back in. Is it working now? Yes? Okay, cool. Like, that's not really that technical of a job, but...
Don't devalue my skills.
Yeah, you plug that modem like the best modem plugger out there.
I still use those skills to this day. So talking about life changing.
Have you tried turning it on and off again? But yeah, it's like we started there, but that's obviously not technical support. That's not security. So in my case, thankfully enough, I was lucky enough that my education was actually from people who were actively working in the industry. So I kind of got to have a really good idea of what the job actually is. But the reason I wanted to get into it, and I think the reason Jason wanted to get into it, the reason John spoke to that he wanted to get into it, is that idea of it is always changing. You feel like your job is to solve puzzles. You feel like you constantly have to keep yourself challenged and interested. And, I didn't want, to me, my worst nightmare when it comes to work is I don't want to go and spend 8 hours a day doing the same exact thing over and over with nothing changing. And that's just not something that I wanted to do and that I wanted out of my career. I wanted something a bit more interesting. However, that is not to say that there's anything wrong with people who want that and who are comfortable with that, who like that idea of a routine, and that's what they want. But if that is what you want, if that is the type of thing that you're looking for, then like you should very much understand early on that that is not what this industry is.
Yeah, the money is not gonna make you happy. Like you spend more of your time at the job than anything else in your life. So aside from maybe sleeping, so when you're in that type of situation, like you really have to think about what am I gonna do here with this X amount of time that we've got.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think, that's one of the reasons I also think it's important to get early into a role that gets you a lot of exposure to a lot of different things, which a well-run SOC will do exactly that for you. Because it can tell you, okay, is this actually for me? Maybe the thing that I was doing up until now was a very specific scope, and maybe I don't like that, but maybe there's some other aspect of it that I really do enjoy. But you're never going to know that without, getting some exposure to it. So, that's to me, it would be one of the first things. It's like, just make sure you understand what this job is. You kind of understand what type of work it is. You understand what the day-to-day, at least a high-level idea is kind of going to be. It's interesting to me that, Jason mentioned DEF CON, but like one of the things we always noticed by going there is it seems like basically 9 out of 10 people wanted to be pen testers. Everybody wants to be a pen tester.
Yeah, like 95% at least.
Exactly. And why is that? You think about, oh, well, because that's the cool part of this job, right? I'm hacking, I'm breaking into systems, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And there's a lot of people that think like, yeah, okay, this is what I want to do, and that's what I want my job to be. But like, talk to an actual pen tester, talk to somebody who does that for a living, understand what that job actually is. Because like, if right now you're sitting there thinking, I want to be a pen tester because it allows me, I'm just going to spend all day hacking and using, Metasploit and all of these tools and breaking into systems and whatever, and it's going to be great. Like, maybe it's not for you, because most pen testers, essentially most of their work, I would like to say like probably like 70% is writing reports and presentations. And
yeah, I got into digital forensics because I really like doing forensics on things, and I don't get to do any forensics on things.
yeah, exactly. So there's obviously it's different places have different scopes and everything, but I'm just saying, like, really research what that job is. Really research what is it you're looking to do, and whether, the title is maybe more exciting than the work. Or at the very least, understand that when you go into interviews, like, make sure that you understand what that role is for that company as well. So you're not then disappointed because you think, you're going to do all these cool things that you think this job should be, but then the scope of that work, for example, is very different. And we'll get into this once we talk more about the interviews and things like that. But yeah, to me, that's one of the things you should have a clear idea on. Some of the other goals I think should be, like John was speaking, like at least know what your next thing is and what you want to do and for what reason. And generally, the way you should kind of look at that, at least if you're asking me, is like, well, what can give you essentially the most bang for your buck in terms of exposure, and not necessarily in the next job, but maybe in the job after that, because of the networking potential, because of the exposure to various things you might be doing that's going to expand your skill set and look really good on the resume. Things like that, I think are very important to understand early on. You don't have to have your 5 and 10 year plan or anything, but like at the very least, kind of the short to medium future, like try to have a clear idea of where you want to go and why, and be able to speak to that. Because I think if you're kind of just applying all over the place for a bunch of different things and hoping something sticks, that makes things very difficult, because generally when you get into the interviews and things like that, you're going to need to speak usually, as to why you're interested in that and what your goals are, and what your expectations are, and why you want to be doing what you're doing. And if you're kind of all over the place, you're going to have a hard time speaking to that, because you're trying to kind of cover a much broader scope.
Yes, I agree.
It's all right.
We're approaching 2 hours, man, and I'm like, wow, like I could probably talk for another couple hours just on personal goals and expectations. So I'm trying to limit myself a little bit here. So as an informational, we have structure. We do have structure here, where we have like bullet points of what we're going to talk about. And my brain is just doing everything it can to say like, no, don't. Who cares about those bullet points? Just start talking. Just keep talking. Don't stop talking. Just keep doing it. But yeah, so some of the last things that we really got to hit on as well is what that work-life balance is that you're looking for. Because when you start getting higher up the chain in IR, you're gonna start dealing with on-call stuff. You're gonna start dealing with potentially situations where you are working like a straight week. And by a straight week, I mean like you've got 2 hours of sleep at the most per day, because you are in the thick of things with an APT actor. If you're one of those people that say like, I won't work for a company that's been compromised, we may have only 3 listeners, but we don't need you. Like, go away. The other side of it is like focus, understand what your work ethic is. Like what are you targeting? What do you consider things acceptable? If you don't want to be 100% focused on the job, it should not be on the job side to say like, no, go away. We don't want you. If you're looking for a place personally that respects your boundaries and everything like that, and you end up having to turn that job down or anything like that because you just don't see good work-life balance, then that's what it is. Just make sure you're doing what's best for you and your family, and while also at the same time understanding like, there's always going to be situations where you may have to turn something down, you may have to take something that doesn't totally fit with that work-life balance or the ethics you expect, but it may be for a limited time. So I just understand what you want.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you're never going to hit usually every checkbox of what you want, but that's the thing. It's like, find out what are you willing to compromise on and what are you not willing to compromise on, and then the stuff you're willing to compromise on, like to what degree. And for both me and John, one of the things that we dealt with in Japan is the whole idea. Like, Japan is notorious for overwork, for essentially, Japan has a word for people basically killing themselves due to overwork. Like, there's a specific vocabulary for that. Like, that is the degree that this is a problem. So obviously, having that work-life balance is a very important conversation for us to have. Like, John, like, maybe you can speak a little bit to like why you're kind of looking in the States for that third shift side of things as well, because I do think it kind of ties into that.
Right. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that at least out here, the work culture is different and the expectations are different. I knew coming into this field that there are going to be elements of it that are going to require, substantial investments of time, and there are going to be instances where you really need to be all hands on deck. I think, to me, that just seems intuitive. That's part of working in a field like security. I think the issue in Japan is, in a lot of those cases of people just collapsing from overwork, is they're just basically being worked for the sake of being overworked. It's just the expectation. Oftentimes it's younger people who are lower on the totem pole, lower on the food chain, and they're the ones that are being given all these to-dos and tasks, and they're not allowed to go home until the boss leaves. That kind of work culture, and that, to me, that can be a very dangerous path to go down and a dangerous reason to be overworking yourself. If it's something like, there's a huge compromise and you need everybody's eyes on the problem, that to me sounds more like part of the job. And one thing that would be attractive about not just third shift, but, and of course you guys have more SOC experience than me, but my general sense is, a SOC that's properly staffed and properly run, there should be a division of labor there. And, you won't have one person who's just taking on everything, right, entirely on their own. They should have people helping them, kind of dividing up the work, and, preventing them from just having a heart attack from the amount of stress that they're dealing with. I don't know anything about what it'll be like going up the chain and becoming more senior. I'm sure, the expectations are going to go up, especially if you're making, the big bucks, right? There's going to be an expectation, and that's something I'm prepared to deal with, right? Moving forward in my career. I just feel like, I feel like my sense is, if you're going to be worked that hard, there should be a reason for it, right? You should be handling something that actually needs your attention, as opposed to just sort of being logged in so you can say that you're logged in, or being at your desk so you can show that you're at your desk, which I think that is a very kind of culturally complicated issue in Japan. And then, I feel like if the job is taking over, I think this is applicable anywhere outside of security as well. If the job is invading your life when you're not working, right? If it's consuming so much of your time and your energy that you're not able to enjoy your time off, I think that's when maybe you have to kind of ask yourself, like, is this worth it? But, for me, the occasional incident that requires, long hours, maybe not that much sleep, to me, that sounds like a part of what excited me about getting me into the field, right? Because I wouldn't want to sleep. I would want to be trying to get it resolved. But if that's happening every single day or every week, you're having that, like that's constant and you can't enjoy your life, that sounds like it could be a bit daunting.
We had a Flash, when Flash was having all of its issues, and it was like CVEs, was it like every couple days it'd patch and there'd be another one. Yeah, that was one of those, like, me and a couple of the other Bechtel folks and the SOC. I don't think we slept for like 3 weeks. That was
Yeah. I mean, even when we initially got in, there was a lot of that, and we were just the SOC folks. Yeah. But that's the thing, though. It's like those should be the exceptions, not the rules. Like if you're constantly putting out fires, that tells me you're probably not doing a very good job overall. Basically, if you're constantly having incidents, then yeah, there's a bigger problem there. But the point kind of being overall, like, yeah, it's know your expectations, know what you're willing to deal with and what you're not willing to deal with. Because the bottom line is, if you're constantly working too much, if you're constantly, if that's causing stress for you, then your quality of your work is going to go down as well. So it's really not productive for a number of different reasons. Just, be aware of that and make sure that that's a conversation you're not afraid to have, like when you're interviewing. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well before. But don't be afraid to know what are the things that you're willing to compromise and not willing to compromise on, and make that very clear. And either they can work within those limitations or they can't. And sometimes that's going to cost you a potential job, but that's okay because it might not have been a good place for you anyway. So
Yeah.
the last thing here we just want to talk about as well is when it comes to expectations. Obviously, there's a talk about money and salary and stuff like that, and obviously salary is very, very important. You need to be able to pay your bills and all of that. So as Jason said earlier, network, figure out what is realistic. The one thing I will say is don't go in just thinking you can request exorbitant amounts for whatever reasons just because this is an industry that tends to pay fairly well. That's kind of a very good way to make a bad impression on a hiring manager. But also from the flip side of that is, do know your worth. Like, know what you're worth and know what your skill set is worth in the industry, and don't be willing to compromise on that either. Like, get to obviously there's a little bit of a give and take, but don't let anybody tell you, and I had personal experience with this. I've had recruiters tell me, like, oh, what you're asking for is way too much. You need to lower that by like 30%. After essentially already having that be, a compromised amount for what I think I actually should be getting. So I was willing to compromise to some degree, but like there's a limit to that. You need to be able to say like, no, I'm not going to devalue myself either. So there's a kind of a delicate balance there, but it is important to understand that as well, because you don't want to potentially, price yourself out of a job, a really good job potentially, just because maybe your expectations are too unrealistic. The flip side of that, you don't want to be taken advantage of either and be 10-20% below the market average for what you're worth. So
Yeah, and the other thing is like there's got to be an understanding that if this is a situation where you are offered something and it is maybe 10% or 20% lower, as an example, just to, I don't know where it is, like how it is for the rest of the different places in the world, but in Arizona, the range is extremely varied, and it depends on what you're coming in as. So we're going to go with what this is targeted for, which is junior to level ones. And I've seen level 1 positions vary between 40 grand upwards to about 80 grand. And that's a huge gap right there. And the fact of the matter is that the reason why there is that gap is some places bring people on with less experience. They're willing to bring on those juniors with almost no experience, not even any kind of education, no background at all. Or it could be a situation where you're coming into a job that just desperately needs people. They need to fill those seats, and maybe this is just your stopgap before you find that dream job. So there is going to be situations where you have to make that determination of, okay, is this something that I desperately need? Is this something that maybe I'm already in a job that's similar, but I want to try and find something where I can get a little bit more responsibility or more focus on certain aspects of security. But again, the fact of the matter is when you're talking and focused on money, you have to know and understand what that worth is. Like, why are you targeting that $70,000, $60,000 price point if you have no education, if you have nothing? If you're using it just simply as this is what other people are getting paid, it's going to be a difficult sell. So focus on your skills, and your skills will then they'll supplement you and help you get to that dollar figure you're looking for.
yeah, exactly. And the thing is, also at a certain point, money becomes a diminishing return type of argument, right? So what I will also say is, to add to that, is obviously there's a lot of factors, but kind of consider kind of the whole package, what's on offer, because there might be places as well that maybe they pay the same or maybe slightly less than the market average, but maybe their environment is really good. Maybe some of the other factors are really positive. For example, it's a very good environment where you can learn. They provide training. They have a structure of their team, or for example, that allows them to be very collaborative. They have a lot of good people who are willing to mentor and teach, and they enjoy that part of it. Maybe there's somebody who, from the top down, they have a very supportive senior leadership who views as security as very important and are willing to support that. So all of those things should be part of that decision, and all of those things are the types of things you should be trying to find out as well. It shouldn't just be a binary decision of a dollar figure, because at a certain point, like I said, that starts to matter way less, because as Jason said, if you're in a good environment that even maybe pays average or less than average, but spending a year in that environment might then push your career forward by 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you have a very specific place you're thinking about in your head as you're mentioning all of this, Alan.
No, it's just complete conjecture.
Okay, all right. Well, we're at 2:15 right now, so
you're basically saying we're already, we talked too much, so we'll leave that here. Hopefully that was a pretty good amount of information for you folks. Let us know what you think on some of the topics we discussed as well, and your experiences as well. We'd love to hear from you guys, and we can always revisit these types of conversations as well. But for now, let's move on to our next part of our podcast, and here we want to do some shout out to the community and talk about some cool tools and some cool people doing cool things. So take it away, Jason. Go for it.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah. Again, a good portion of this is specifically targeted to trying to make sure that the folks who are actively out there trying to help folks in the industry, and they're doing it in such a fantastic capacity. That's what we want to make sure we are pushing you folks to. And there's a lot of people on Twitter who throw information out there. There's a lot of vendors out there that will throw out a blog and then be like, oh, by the way, you might have read our blog, but make sure that you get our company to buy our product, or some other stuff like that. We're trying to focus a little bit less on folks with those type of agendas, and just folks who genuinely want to help the community and help people. So the very first one, which I've sent so many people to over the course of the past 10 years. All right, so one of the people that we are going to focus on is Professor Messer. Professor Messer has built just tons and tons and tons of YouTube content. It has anything and everything you could imagine. It feels like all CompTIA stuff. I used him for some Microsoft certifications, and it's been fantastic. The one thing that I will mention is the last time I took a look at his page, even as I want to say it said a few weeks ago, he's putting up Sec 601 content, which is the Security Plus 601, the newest Security Plus test. And there's so many people that I know that have used his videos as their means to try and pass a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, both of us have used them at least, and you see it kind of mentioned constantly in a lot of these places that mention kind of good learning resources. So yeah, definitely give that a look.
Cool. And the other person that we want to really put on our what would we call it, the Mount Rushmore of security. It's a
Oh man, I wonder what that would look like. That'd be a lot of people. They'd need a bigger mountain.
Yeah. So that's a big thing in wrestling right now, is everyone's talking about their wrestling Mount Rushmores. But no, this fella, his name's John Strand, and he's built out this company called Black Hills, and it's been pretty incredible. They've been creating pay what you can courses, which is exactly that, pay what you can. And that is, gosh, I just wish everything was that way, because the fact of the matter is there's certainly going to be a very large amount of people who will find ways to give back to things like that. It's not something that they may be able to provide immediately, but you never know. You never know.
And just, yeah, I mean, John Strand is kind of a household name at this point. Like, he's a SANS instructor. He, like, as Jason mentioned, is on, he's part of Black Hills Information Security. For anybody who does any work with stuff like Bro, those are the guys who made Rita, which is an awesome tool. John is also on a lot of podcasts as well. I've taken training from John Strand as well directly before, and he's just an absolutely amazing instructor, both in his like a breadth of knowledge, but also in just being genuinely somebody who's passionate about this industry, but more so just passionate about teaching other people and knowledge sharing and helping folks out. And really, like, can't say enough good things about the work that he's doing. So yeah, please, this latest thing he's doing is the Pay What You Can courses, and it's something that I'm taking a part of as well now, and I've recommended it to people as well. So please take a look, and you can go ahead and follow him on Twitter at StrandJS, and you can follow Black Hills Information Security at twitter.com/bhinfosecurity. And we'll have links to all of this, including the videos for Professor Messer as well, in the episode description. So yeah, just wanted to give a couple of shout outs here for folks who are looking for some more learning resources, and let us know what you think. Let us know if this is something you maybe didn't know about, and if you took some of that training, what was your experience?
All right, next piece is our tool recommendation, the thing that gets gold stars, happy faces, and all the little dancing things that might be needed to dance to make things dance. We wanted to talk today about Tsurugi. It is a digital forensics virtual machine. In most cases, when someone starts talking about that, the first thing out of their mouth tends to be SIFT. Tsurugi is a kind of up-and-coming new platform, if you will. I mean, it's basically just a virtual machine with a whole lot of goodies on there. They're all updated. It's being pretty continually maintained, and the past like 3 or 4 different times that I've done any kind of forensification, I've utilized Tsurugi as my main platform, and it's worked perfect. It also, probably the most or the biggest selling point is that when you turn it on, it makes like a sword slashing sound. It goes shing. It's really cool.
Fancy. Yeah, that's this was actually something that I was one of the people who was using SIFT for a long time as well, and SIFT is still an option, and that's maintained by SANS. Tsurugi, as Jason mentioned, it's a bit more recent. It's new, and it's something that was actually kind of new to me as well. So, but definitely worth checking out. And the biggest thing with things like this, on obviously that kind of tends to be very important, is these kind of VMs. They tend to live and die by how well are they maintained, how well are they kept up to date and updated, because if this is something that 6 months down the line all of a sudden nothing works, obviously that's going to be a bit of a problem, and not exactly something that you can rely on in a pinch, essentially. So they seem to be very active about maintaining and updating it. So give it a look and let us know what you think.
Shing.
Man, you should do Foley, Jason. That was fantastic.
Yeah. Shing. That is the exact.
Who invited Akira Kurosawa on this podcast?
Oh my God. Okay. So our last little piece here. This is on us. This is where we talk about all of our good stuff. I don't know. I might have little more dancing things. Not that you can see anything. I don't know why my brain just went like, "Oh, this is a podcast, dummy." But here's our social media links and all of our good stuffers. Basically, don't forget twitter.com/malwarewolf. We got youtube.com/malwarewolf. We just got malwarewolf.com. Don't forget anchor.fm/malwarewolf. If you hop on there and you think we aren't the biggest idiots on the planet, you're wrong, but you can also still help us out by providing listener support. Listener support allows us to keep kind of moving forward. It's essentially more of like a donations program, and it'll be pretty cool.
Yeah, and so we are just starting out, obviously, so all of this stuff really does matter. It does make a big difference. So you folks are social media savvy, so follow, subscribe, and if you want to support us, that's great. If you just want to tune in and listen and maybe tell other people to tune in and listen, that's great too. Any form of support that you folks are able to offer is great and greatly appreciated. So but I think at this point, I think we kind of went on for a while. So before we close out here, I just want to say thank you to our first guests. John, thank you very much for coming on. You can go ahead and tell us that we talk entirely too much. We know. So sorry about that.
No, it was a pleasure. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and call it a podcast then. So we'll talk to you guys in a couple of weeks. Thank you for listening, and have a great weekend.